Here's another thing that I want you to see. On that day, you stand there alone, without lawyer, without advocate. No one, as the old Puritans would say, no one shall show thee pity. No one. Not father, not mother, not brother, not child. No one will advance your cause. As a matter of fact, when you take your first step into hell, the last thing you will hear is all of creation worshiping God because he has rid the earth of you. You say, how can that be? How can it be? Let me share with you something. The Bible teaches that all men are radically depraved. In the same way that Hitler was radically depraved, that he was not some phenom. He was literally us. Now, the reason you're not that is by God's grace, he restrains your evil. We hear all the time of even children that will murder their own parents, plot and murder their own parents. Do you think that child is just exceptionally wicked? And that your children aren't like that, or you weren't like that when you were a child. There is a thing called the restraining grace of God that restrains the evil of men so that history can continue, so that God's redemptive work can go on, and he can be glorified in it, and men can be saved. But on the day of judgment, you must understand that all the common grace of God that kept you from being the most vile monster on this planet will be withdrawn, and you will stand there as you are now, with no grace restraining your evil, nothing making you lovely, nothing making you lovable. You are you. All the time, you've been pretending to have virtue and merit and prancing around thinking you can earn your own salvation. If someone said you were bad, you would get mad at them, not knowing that every virtue, every restraint from evil has only been because God's grace made you able to do that. But now he's pulled back, and there's nothing left there but a monster. Do you see now? Here's something that you need to understand. Many of you have never even heard any of this. And you think, well, who does he think he is saying these things I've never heard? Herein lies the problem. If I were to simply say, well, I'm saying this because it's Scripture, you could say, I hope it's on the tip of your tongue. Well, that's your interpretation. And obviously you're wrong if the great majority of people today are saying just the opposite. But here's where validation of church history comes in. If you look back throughout all of church history at those men and women who truly embraced the Scriptures and suffered and died for their faith, these were the very things they all said. Even all the men that so many people, well, Charles Spurgeon, one of the greatest preacher who ever lived, he believed this. Martin Lloyd-Jones, the Puritans, the Reformers, the early Baptists, the early Methodists, the early Presbyterians, the early Congregationalists. This was common food in the pulpit every Sunday. And now it's like, from where do you come with this strange teaching? When you look at Israel, and they're worshiping in the temple, supposedly, walk out of the temple, and then go worship Baal, and deny everything the Scripture says, and you go, how can they live in such contradiction? Then look at contemporary Christianity. And be very, very careful how you judge Israel. And when you look at Israel, how could these prophets rise up just affirming the people in all their sin and pretending like God was just some old grandpa that would delight to see them no matter how dirty they are? Where does that come from? Same thing you see today, don't you? So what I'm telling you is not some invention of my own. And it doesn't come, I wish it did, from the brilliance of my own interpretation. Although I do interpret the Scripture that way, I want you to know that most of this I learned from 2,000 years of church history also. And the way men of God and women of God have always approached the text. Now, also know There's no angelic choirs with joyful singing. Not one voice of gladness. Not one voice of gladness, not one sound. In chapter 4, there's worship. Now, all of heaven is silent. I remember one time, maybe it's because, I don't know, I always looked at things differently. One of my teachers, I think it was the 3rd grade, Miss Carson, I believe. She wanted us to draw sounds, some sort of academic challenge. Draw a sound. When you hear... And so I was sitting there going, well, what could I do that would be unique? I mean, bird sound, that's not unique. You hear that every day. And so I thought, I go, okay. And so I took my crayon. I don't use those anymore. I took my crayon and I went straight up the paper like that and made the sharpest point, and came down like that and made the sharpest point. And I made sure the emphasis was on this dagger-like point. And she said, what is that sound, Paul? And I said, silence. Silence. There is sometimes nothing more cutting and sharp than silence. Terrifying, especially for people in our age of media and noise. Silence. No singing. Nothing. Also, there is no lightning and thunder in chapter 20, but there's lightning and thunder in chapter 4. And you say, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? No. No, it's not. Why? Well, you see, you're misunderstanding lightning and thunder, especially when you look at the giving of the law and you see lightning and thunder. You see, those were given in order to make the event solemn, in order to warn, in order to say, listen! If there was a train that somehow derailed from over there and was running towards these windows right now, I wouldn't go, oh, look, a train. But I would thunder forth, a train! The lightning and the thunder. These manifestations of God, these great epiphanies, are warnings that He really is holy. We really are not, and there is a big problem here, and you need to listen. If there is a small cloudburst or rain shower, you may stand out on your porch and just bask in the beauty of it. But if there is thunder and lightning, and it seems that the sky is going to be cracked apart, you run inside, and you pay attention to the news. So the fact that there's now no lightning and thunder means that it's been pulled back. God's done with you. No more warning. When I'm teaching my children from the book of Proverbs, something that is a life practice in our home, I'm always telling them, because it's there in the text. Children know this. How many children, especially when they leave the home, no longer heed the warnings of wisdom? And I said, there will be sometimes when you do not heed a warning of wisdom, and your father can come to the rescue and correct it. But there can come a time when you do not heed the warning, and your father, who would move heaven and earth if he could, is going to have to say to you, I cannot help you. A lot of times I'll use illustration and say, you go out of my house, you decide that you want to go party or something, and you get drunk and you get in a car and you kill 5 people coming home from church. As you're driving wildly on a Sunday evening. And then you call me from the police station. I will come. I will be there. I will suffer with you. You are my son. But when the law comes down, Daddy, help me fix this. I cannot. And on that day, no one will fix it. No one. Because there's only one who can fix it, and you've already denied Him. That's the Son of God, the Redeemer.